Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 258, cover dated February 1990, and this is an eye-catching cover, a dynamic one by Jubilee, inked by Scott Williams, featuring Wolverine using his adamantium claws against the Mandarin and taking big chunks out of the Mandarin's body armor there. And I like all of the details in this one. Such a great command of anatomy by Jubilee at this point in his career. Lots and lots of detail in the rendering of Wolverine's muscles and anatomy. And also I like the little detail of the dragon here on the Mandarin's armor as well. No background to this one, much like the covers of the previous two issues of this three-part story, part of the Acts of Vengeance series or event that took place in late 1989. In the Marvel Universe, where villains not usually associated with a character took them on. And so in this case, we've got the Mandarin pitched against the X-Men, most specifically Wolverine and Psylocke. So let's open this one up to the splash page, and it is a very striking splash page indeed. Again, no background to this, and the mystery is, where is Wolverine on this blank page? And we have to remember what happened at the end of the previous issue, where Psylocke, apparently in the control of the Hand and Matsuo Tsurayaba, and now the Hand's master assassin, took out Wolverine with her psychic knife. So the creative team here, well, rather, the title of the story is Broken Chains, which foreshadows the ultimate breaking of the chains by Psylocke and Wolverine in this issue. And the creative team is Chris Claremont writer, Jubilee penciler, Scott Williams inker. It should be noted that at this point in their collaboration, Jubilee and Scott Williams have just done over half a dozen issues together. So still very early in what would turn out to be a career-long collaboration between these two artists. Tom Orzechowski, letterer, and Glynis Oliver, colorist, long-time letterer and colorist on the title. So the narrative captions are first-person narration by Wolverine. My body's at rest, in harmony with nature within and without. My spirit at peace. Neither sight nor taste, nor sound, nor taste, nor touch, nor smell, not even the smallest sensation to disturb this all-embracing stillness. All I'm left with are my thoughts. So everything seems rosy here, with Wolverine in some kind of deep meditative state. But let's turn the page and see what happens next. And again, before I turn the page, just once again, great command of anatomy here and a great collaboration between Lee and Williams on the inks, where you've got such fine detail. A hallmark of Scott Williams inking over Lee is the fineness of the rendering of the body hair on Wolverine, as well as those little rendering, those hatching details for the details of musculature and other anatomy on Wolverine. Really, really well done. So turn the page and things go wrong here, and they are mad. So those are his thoughts, and that is really nicely done by Claremont, just pulling back in terms of overwriting this particular page and letting the art do the talking with these diagonally laid out panels, and this as it turns out, psychic shadow enveloping Wolverine as he screams at the end of the 4-panel sequence. Really, really nicely done by Lee in this particular page. So then we switch out of his mind to Psylocke, and she is in the lotus position above a sensory deprivation tank. And we saw this technology in the first part of this 3-part storyline, that is Uncanny X-Men 256. You can find my review of that on the channel. And the question is where is this taking place? It turns out it is perhaps, well, actually that's unclear. So originally this was on an island in the South Seas that is owned and run by the Hand. It could be there at the moment, but later this technology is moved to under the Mandarin's mansion in Hong Kong. So just let's note that. Interesting use of a screen tone here for the shadows over the top of the flotation tank. And what is revealed here is that Psylocke is in psychic rapport with Wolverine, as the Hand under Matsuo Tsurayaba, pictured here, are trying to corrupt Wolverine and turn him to their cause. but he's fighting with all his animal strength and warrior ferocity, says Psylocke. But still the shadow overwhelms him, eating through flesh and bone to the very pit of his soul. And this is a major motif or theme of Claremont's run on the X-Men, that every hero has a dark side, a shadow side, and that there's a constant moral battle waged in order to maintain control of that dark side. So Jubilee here is a prisoner of the Hand also, and she asks what is being done to him. So her question is the prompt for a response and explanation by Tsurayaba, where he says that what some sublime transcendent horror must have torn from him such a scream. A pity both he and Psylocke are invisible to our monitor systems, else they would have told us. That's a reference back to Roma's spell in Uncanny X-Men 229, which makes them invisible to all technology. Instead, we must depend on Wolverine's former friend. So this is all about corrupting Wolverine and turning him to the Hand. And Jubilee rather spunkily says, "You're real slime, you know that, and you, child, are impertinent," says Tsurayaba in response. But not for long. The second stage has begun, and this is another great page. Great use of colour here by Glynis Oliver. The red that she always uses to convey emotional violence, and that is what is happening here as Wolverine's soul or psyche is being corrupted. First came corruption from without, now from within, said Tsurayaba, twisting and tainting all that represents the man, giving full vent, perhaps for the first time in Wolverine's adult life, to the beast. And that has long been what Claremont has explored in relation to Wolverine, who joined the X-Men way back in Giant Size X-Men #1, and that Claremont began his work on with Uncanny X-Men 94. He's always explored from the beginning Wolverine's battle, his ongoing battle between the dark bestial side of himself, the psycho killer, the beast, the animal, and the samurai side. He's a failed samurai, but that side of him that is honorable and seeks to control his bestial urges. And we see Jim Lee here rendering the beast getting the better of Wolverine. We see all of these tumors or boils erupting on Wolverine's skin. Very dynamic page. Really, really well drawn. Really arresting images. And let's continue. So, and another arresting image here of Wolverine in shadow, and picked out the highlights on him, just picked out in red by Glynis Oliver. An interesting inking technique here, I would say, mostly using a brush perhaps. Scott Williams for the background of this, and splattering on some white paint too. Nicely done. And then we have this mirroring of Wolverine's pose by Psylocke, and we have them in a psychic rapport. So this is all, as I've said earlier, the Hand's attempt to make Wolverine into their image, to remake him in their image. And so Jubilee, witness to this, is aghast and deeply upset, and she demands, and great lettering here by Tom Orzechowski, "Stop it, stop it, stop it. Why are you doing this? What do you want from us?" And I like the jagged edges of the speech balloon there. Really, really great lettering by Orzechowski, conveying the emotion of Jubilee's outburst here. But I would have to say, a little criticism, very, very difficult to draw young faces without overdoing the line work, because as soon as you do overdo the line work, it makes the face look a little bit older. So Jubilee here looking a bit middle-aged because of the over-rendering of the lines on her face. Just a mild criticism. And Tsurayaba here again boasting that Wolverine's going to become the Hand's most fearsome assassin. Jubilee calls him crazy, but no less brilliant or deadly because of it. Quite the contrary, he says as he grabs her by the throat. But something goes wrong in the background, so we can see it indicated here by this magenta splash around one of the technicians' heads. And this particular technician explains the resonances that Psylocke's receiving from Wolverine and broadcasting to us are beyond the capacity of even our strongest psychic dampers. So this experiment is about to go awry somewhat. The technician explains some of our more susceptible personnel are bound to be affected. So this one launches himself at the ninjas, and Jubilee uses this as an opportunity to make an escape. And this also gives Jubilee an opportunity to render homage to Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns and Carrie Kelly in Dark Knight Returns, whom Jubilee, her visual design and her new costume is patterned on. And we see it most particularly in this sequence of 3 panels, this one and this one, where Jim Lee uses that technique that he got from Frank Miller to render the flesh parts of a character in black and just keep the costume free for color. And it's something, as I said, that Frank Miller used in Dark Knight Returns. So this really is, this little sequence strikes me as an homage to Dark Knight Returns, and a really great storytelling by Jim Lee, very dynamic stuff as Jubilee jumps over and through the ninjas of the hand using her mutant power, her fireworks. And I like this little sequence where she swings around here, got to pull a sharp right, she says, and she slides through the legs of this particular ninja here. Ultra gleam polish makes the floors so darn slippery as she slides along. That's really nice stuff. So she's thinking to herself as she's zapping them with her fireworks, I make it outside, don't see why not. Contact Wolvie's war buddy, Rose Wu. So Rose Wu, we saw her in the previous issue, and that's an interesting one that Jubilee's revealing at this point, that Wolverine's connection with Rose goes all the way back to World War II. And this is like a little hinting setup, or it would turn out to be, for the story told in Uncanny X-Men 268, which is half set during World War II, but before America that Nazi Germany declared war on the US. So Jubilee is running away, but then she runs into this figure in the foreground and is shoved to the ground by him. And again, there's that technique of rendering or blacking in the flesh parts of a character and just leaving elements of their costume or clothing open for color. And in this case, it's the rings on the finger of this hand, which is a big clue as to the identity of the character. When I turn the page, it is indeed the Mandarin. And that is a nice top-down angle on the Mandarin in his double-breasted suit. And again, an interesting use of a screen tone there by Scott Williams in the inks. And he introduces himself that he's the Mandarin. So he was there in the first issue of this 3-part story, but he didn't feature in part 2, issue 257. That's because he was involved in events of acts of vengeance elsewhere in the Marvel Universe, but he's back in Hong Kong. Or rather, if this is Hong Kong or this is Tsurayaba's island, he's back in Southeast Asia. And he's there, I suppose, to see the progress in terms of turning Wolverine to become another master assassin of the hand. And he uses his Mento intensifier ring on Jubilee in order to take control of her, give him dominance over her psyche, and ensure her proper behavior. But he also has another interest in Jubilee, which is that he recognizes that she's of Chinese heritage, and he says, how sad to behold a daughter of the Middle Kingdom so sullied by the mongrel ways of the West. But you are young, child, there may yet be hope for your redemption. So he's got a project now in terms of turning Jubilee into one of his servitors or team, as he says later on. But first of all, the hand ninja attack him because they say the girl is ours. So he turns to look at them, and now we get a demonstration of his power and ability. So he uses his rings against the hand ninja, but also, and this is told in Claremont's narration, capable in the Mandarin's, the rings are capable in the Mandarin's hands of wreaking unimaginable havoc, hardly less so than the man himself, with a martial arts prowess that is second to none. So I like that from Claremont, that he's indicating that the Mandarin isn't just all about those rings. Instead, or rather in addition, he has independent warrior skills, which makes him a formidable foe. So then Tsurayaba arrives on the scene, and the Mandarin says, I do not gladly suffer assaults upon my person. And Tsurayaba's apologetic, bowing there to the Mandarin. It was an error, it will not happen again, nor tolerate the fool responsible for them. The Mandarin continues, and Tsurayaba deeply submits, saying, Dreadlord and Master, and most humbly stand rebuked. And I like Orzechowski's lettering here, where we've got the open speech balloon, but the tiny lettering indicating how quietly and humbly Tsurayaba makes his obeisance to the Mandarin. That's a nice page from Lee. And then we have a little scene switch just for a couple of pages, and it is a scene switch to Muir Isle. So the X-Men have been dispersed all around the world since Psylocke, like telepathically persuaded them, some of them anyway, to go through the Siege Perilous. And that story was told in Uncanny X-Men 251, a review of which you will find on the channel. It was told in a very strange way, psychic aboriginal dream time and Wolverine's hallucinations. But in any case, it was Psylocke who persuaded, and in some cases telepathically pushed, the X-Men to go through the Siege Perilous, and they're dispersed all around the world. And on Muir Isle, you've got Banshee and Forge, who are determined to find the X-Men and bring them back together again. But first of all, they're securing the island. Forge has used his mutant power, which gives him the ability to invent new machines and technology to secure the island, and Banshee is testing it. And we get a great anchor image here of Banshee flying in to the island in order to test those defenses. Really, really great work by Lee and Williams here, and a cool choice for this anchor image to have Banshee's foreshortened form break the borders of the panels. And in the dialogue, or not the dialogue, but rather the narration, I like it from Claremont. There's an interesting comparison here. Banshee comes in as fast as he's able, sonic scream pitched so high it can't be heard, as he skims sea and shore at barely the height of a tall man. So instead of saying, 6 foot above the waves, at barely the height of a tall man, there's just something interesting about the way that Claremont has thought out that qualification of the height of Banshee's low-flying sneak attack on the island. But he is caught by Forge's technology. And then we get this interesting little moment as well, where the team, the new X-Men, are dressed in these new costumes. They are Jim Lee's redesign of Jack Kirby's original uniforms for the X-Men. And Banshee is uncomfortable in them. He says it's these new uniforms. And this is Sharon Friedlander. She's a supporting character who first turned up in New Mutants during the Bill Sienkiewicz run. Aren't they just wonderful? I love them, she says. Call me an old fogey, Sharon, says Banshee in response, but they don't feel quite dignified. I like that characterization from Claremont. And we have this little moment of dialogue between Banshee and Forge, the older male members of the new team. Gotta move with the time, Sean. Cutting edge threads for the cutting edge team, says Forge. And Banshee demurs and he says, I don't know, Forge, something feels wrong. And he thinks to himself, everyone seems affected. Moira most of all, save me and Lorna Dane. And Lorna's nowhere to be found. So it will be revealed that the Shadow King is behind what's going on Muir Island, but his pawn, his agent, is Legion, is Moira MacTaggart's schizophrenic, multiple personality mutant son. And he has been taken over, because it will be revealed of the Shadow King's influence. He's been taken over by one of his multiple personalities, the bad boy, Jack Wayne identity. And this one has taken Lorna Dane prisoner and obviously put her behind this cell, Mutant X, extremely dangerous. This was Legion's own cell on the island. And he explains there he's got control of, the Jack Wayne personality has got control of all the kids' selves and powers. And through them, influence over every mind on this rock. Gonna have me some fun, he says, and there ain't a blessed thing you can do to stop me. But for whatever reason, his influence doesn't extend to Banshee. And that's interesting. Nor Lorna Dane, and she's trying to get out of the cell, but to no avail, at least in this issue. And then we're back to Hong Kong, and we're back to the second part, the conclusion, the climax of this story involving Psylocke, Wolverine and the Hand. And remember the title of the story, Broken Chains. So now we're at the Mandarin's villa. And the Mandarin, as I said earlier, has a plan in mind for Jubilee. So he has her dressed there in traditional Chinese costume and clothing. It's interesting, like the detail here in the background, we see a little Buddha squatting on a table there. So Jim Lee really pouring a lot of time and effort into some of the backgrounds in this particular issue. And the Mandarin here saying to Jubilee, you are Chinese with as noble a heritage as it is ancient, and it is the Mandarin's charge to ensure you remain true to it. You and those of your mutant breed shall form the vanguard of my army, which will restore the Middle Kingdom to its rightful glory as preeminent among the world's great powers. So that's his big plan for Jubilee. Interesting use of a colour hold there in the background for the window behind him, or is it an art print behind him, one or the other, but it looks pretty cool and an interesting top-down angle. But we get a nice little comic sequence here in the middle of the page, just these 4 panels, kind of influenced to my mind by, again, Jim Lee's reading of Frank Miller. So we've got these close-ups on the faces of the characters. Jubilee here scrunching up her face, oh yeah, and then sticking her tongue out at the Mandarin looking quite grim there but saying nothing, and his servant Li Fong just rolling his eyes up to heaven and sighing. I like that. That's a nice little comic sequence there by Claremont, and Jim Lee handles it well. And then the scene switches, meanwhile, back down in the catacombs. So this now is the setup under the Mandarin's mansion in Hong Kong, and my question is, was the technology brought there from the Hans Island in the South Chinese Sea, or was a duplicate room built with the same technology? In any case, what goes on here is that Psylocke is still meditating and in psychic contact with Wolverine and trying to corrupt him, trying to corrupt his soul, and she uses a ploy of seduction on this particular page. So we're inside Wolverine's mind on this page, and this is really, really well drawn by Lee, where we have Psylocke taking on the forms of Wolverine's loves or beloveds, including Jean Grey in her Neil Adams era costume, Mariko Yashida, and Yukio from the Frank Miller and Chris Claremont Wolverine miniseries. And as she says, Jean Grey, Mariko Yashida, and Yukio, all the women Wolverine's truly loved, wrapped up in a single perfect package. And then she addresses him saying, embrace me, my heart, take what's yours by right, what you've always wanted. And I like this, his response, don't mind if I do, as he extrudes the claws and slashes her across the gut. Really, really great scene here by Lee. So now he's standing over her body on the ground. No more games, darling, he shouts. No more masks. If you've got the guts, face me as yourself. So she does with pleasure. And Psylocke says, seduction was but one pathway to your soul. By far the better is conquest. So now they fight, but on the astral or psychic plane. And she uses the focused totality of her side powers, her psychic knife, and pushes it right through his skull, the psychic representation of his skull, saying with it, she makes him forever hers. So that's really nicely done, and it replays what happened at the end of the previous issue where she used the psychic knife on him and obviously was able to bring him to the hand by virtue of that. But something goes wrong here. There's a backlash. She's in agony, says the technician. Get a medical squad up to her at once. But too late, bub, says Wolverine in the flotation tank. And I like Lee's choice here to show us Wolverine upside down. It really is interesting, the angles, this top-down angle of Psylocke meditating or in the lotus position on the gangway, then the upshot of the technician, then this side profile, but Wolverine upside down, here with this inset panel. Yeah, nice layouts. And now we see these characters, these ghosts, these memories of Nick Fury and Carol Danvers, who formerly worked with Wolverine when he was in the Canadian Secret Service. And they're made manifest to Psylocke. What did you do to me? She asks, and she's all woozy. And again, I like the way that Orzechowski has implied that by the wonky lettering in this wobbly speech balloon. So Carol says, poor darling, Nicholas, she doesn't look at all well. And I like what piece of dialogue Claremont gives. Nick Fury, he says there, so let's make her worse. So they climb up on the gangway, and Psylocke is confused that she can see and hear them and hit them, and that makes them real, even though they're saying they're figments of Wolverine's imagination. Only to Wolverine, says Carol, and he's nuts. But then, since your knife locked you into his psychosis, so are you. So she cracks Psylocke in the jaw, and now they're fighting up there on the gangway. So one of the technicians asks that Matsuo Tsurayaba be summoned, but he's returned to his island, which could be a reference to Japan, or the Hans Island in the South Seas. So he's not going to play any role in the remainder of this issue. So now Wolverine, who's conscious, is slashing at the glass of the flotation tank. He makes his way out of it and onto the ground. So the prisoner is escaping. And Nick Fury, here, the kind of figment of Wolverine's imagination, starts blasting. Any objections, Shorty, to my shortening the odds? Free country, be my guest. And this is a really cool bit where the ninjas are dropping as if struck by Nick Fury's bullets. So how on earth could that be happening? Well, we'll get a little explanation of that on the last couple of pages of the issue. But Wolverine is out of the flotation tank. Another great anchor image here. Great spotting of blacks and rendering of the musculature. And again, that trademark fine detail of the body hair on Wolverine in Scott Williams' inking. And now we get a physical fight between Psylocke and Wolverine. But it all reduces to these 3 slim panels where Psylocke says, "The prey is mine, and so too the honor of the kill." And Wolverine responds laconically, "Works for me, darling." And then we just get this black panel here with a few slashes of red, indicating violence and blood drawn. And then the scene switches to upstairs in the Mandarin's mansion, and we've got him there with Jubilee and Psylocke arriving with Wolverine in her arms. And again, a reminder that Wolverine is only 5'3" and Psylocke is about 5'11". So she throws him on the ground. Wolverine attempted an escape. I regret he will be of no further use either to you or the Hand. So the implication is she killed him. And the Mandarin smiles. "Such is the will of the gods, and not entirely unexpected. Dispose of the remains if you please." So obviously Jubilee deeply upset here. And again, look, Orzechowski, a big open speech balloon and tiny lettering of no. But we're going to see that we get a bigger response from her on the page turn. And it's going to be a big surprise. So, "No, no, no," she yells. And then boom, let's rip with huge display of her mutant power. And it's really dredged up by the deep sorrow and shock of seeing Wolverine as she believes him dead. And just great inking here, the blast lines from her fireworks, and Scott Williams cutting in some white media as well. Nicely inked. And then I like the way that the camera pulls back. We see the explosion out from outside the mansion and from all the way over at the docks below the hill that the mansion is built on. And then we get the aftermath and Jubilee's own surprise and shock at what she was capable of. "Holy moly," she says, "where did that come from? And like, do I ever want to do it again?" So Claremont hinting at how powerful a mutant Jubilee could be as she grows up, and if she's trained by the likes of Professor X. So now Psylocke leaps at the Mandarin. So she's freed from the Hand's control and Tsurayaba's control. It was all a ruse. And the Mandarin says that he's confronting the basest of betrayals as he summons the rest of his armor there. "Matter of opinion, chum," says Psylocke in her British dialect. "I consider it more a thankful reversion to true type." And the Mandarin puts it together, which means, I assume, that the Hand's vaunted conditioning has failed, and Psylocke is once more X-Man and hero. "Cold comfort, my dear," he says, "once my flame blast has reduced you to ashes." It's a really nice drawing of Psylocke there, getting hit by that particular flame blast, and nice rim lighting there by Glynis Oliver in the colours too. And then we have the fight between them. Another great little action sequence drawn out by Jim Lee. So she manifests her psychic knife, but she cannot use it, oddly, on someone unless it makes physical contact. So the Mandarin's able to throw her away, throw her at Jubilee. And Jubilee asks Psylocke, you switch sides or what? Came to my senses, actually. And the Mandarin completes the dialogue with, let that then be your epitaph, like what's written on her tombstone. You both have courage, I respect that, he says. Therefore your deaths shall be quick and without pain. I truly regret the sacrifice of jubilation, but such is fate. But then his arm won't move. And why is that? It's because Psylocke, of course, is a telepath, and she can act remotely. By virtue of that, you forget, Mandarin, she says to him, I've worn your rings and touched your mind. And he completes what she's saying, would pit your will against mine. You're a magnificent woman, a worthy foe, but doomed. So Psylocke continues, we'll see, get away, Jubilee, take Wolverine with you while you have the chance. So he's still, it would appear, unconscious. But move, girl, she says, I'll hold him as long as I'm able. That moment, Psylocke, has passed, says the Mandarin. Your life is done. And then, of course, Wolverine is there to save the day. He's up unconscious. He pops two of his claws. The middle one, of course, left in his arm. And I like the dialogue here as well. And it's of the time, very much after Chris Claremont has watched Tim Burton's Batman, the first Batman movie, 1989 movie, where Wolverine asks the Mandarin, tell me, bub, you ever dance with the devil by the pale moonlight? So that was Jack Nicholson's line in that particular film. What the devil does that mean? Beats me, says Wolverine. Wolverine, how about do you feel lucky? So Dirty Harry's line, Dirty Harry Callahan from the 70s. So Claremont playing around here with Wolverine's tough guy image, but also the two sides of him, that kind of crazy psychopath side, you ever dance with the devil by the pale moonlight, and his kind of tough guy on the side of the law aspect of himself. Do you feel lucky? Interesting, that coming out in those lines and having a bit of fun with it as well. You were shamming, Wolverine, says Mandarin, feigning defeat. That's a fact. So now he's got him. There's a type of Mexican standoff here. Even if you slay me with your third claw, gotta admit I'm tempted, says Wolverine. With my dying thought, I'll command my ring to disintegrate your friend. So how is this going to be resolved? Well, it's going to be resolved in 2 panels on the next page. Then she'll be dead, but so will you. Fair exchange. So Wolverine, like a bit crazy there, prepared to sacrifice Psylocke so long as the Mandarin's taken out, and the Mandarin here aghast. No more blood need be shed, he says, provided we can arrive at, and Wolverine fills in an accommodation between men of honor. Why not, says the Mandarin. Why not indeed? Question is, do we qualify? And so after tying up all appropriate loose ends, and they're away from Hong Kong. Really nice panel here. Everything is nice about this one. The composition, the rendering of the clouds here in the background, Scott Williams using a dry brush maybe for the clouds, and Glynis Oliver's use of color for the sunset as they leave the Hong Kong bay or harbor. Really, really nicely done. And then we get a wrap here. We get some explanations. So, like, let me get this straight, okay, says Jubilee. When Betsy zapped into your head, that somehow, like, miraculously sorted out all nutso stuff in here and shocked her back to normal? Yup, says Wolverine, laconically. Be real. She responds, it worked. You're going to argue with success, he says. It could be a trick. Trust me, I know. Give me a break, says Jubilee. She's a telepath. She could be playing with your head. Tried that once. Learned her lesson. So, you know, real laconic, Spartan, macho dialogue from Wolverine, and we get Jubilee's perspective on that. Stubborn, stubborn, brick brain, macho poop. And then she thinks to herself, I don't care what you say, I'll never trust her. So Claremont building, you know, an interesting setup for characterization of this trio in upcoming issues when they would still be working together all the way up to Extinction Agenda, and Jubilee's mistrust of Psylocke continuing, and Psylocke saying to Wolverine here, these two old friends and X-Men colleagues, you took a terrible gamble, Logan, letting me into your head. Not hardly, he says. Same sort of calculated risk as when I faced down the Mandarin. A man like that has too much pride and arrogance. He's too convinced he's God's gift to throw his life away. That was my edge. And I like the spotting of blacks in this particular panel here, as the sun sets and maybe the moon comes out, and Psylocke continuing here, with you, well, or rather Wolverine continuing saying, with you, well, reading minds is a long way from being able to cope with what you find, and I'm really a very complicated kind of guy. So it was the complexity of his psyche and the depth of his madness that he figured if Psylocke made contact with it, it'd either knock you for a major loop or put things into right. Whichever, it'd work for me. And so this is a really nice panel here of her bowed head and the use of the screen tone here for the shadow on one side of her face. I was sucked so deeply into your madness, she says. I believe the phantoms of your memory were real, and she can still see them, or we can see them. Who's to say they're not, says Wolverine. And I like it. It's nicely drawn here with Nick Fury and Carol Danvers dancing around the top of the ship there. When they struck me, I felt pain, she said. When they fired, my mind struck down those I thought had been hit just to keep the hallucination consistent. I too became mad. So that's the explanation of what happened earlier in the issue. Perhaps I still am, she wonders. I should not be here. Got that straight, says Jubilee. That's a nice little comic bit of dialogue there, saying it very quietly in the background. Where else? Where better? Asks Wolverine. It's my doing. The X-Men were cast through the Siege Perilous. Then here's your chance to make amends. Betsy, we're a team. While we live, Xavier's dream lives. It's that simple, that important. And she wonders, suppose I'm not truly free? Suppose part of me still owes allegiance to the Hand? Wolverine, I'm not sure I can trust myself. How can you? And he responds, I got no choice. And an interesting final image there, or rather the disposition of the dialogue over the final image of the ship sailing into the sunset out of Hong Kong. And where are they going? Well, they're going to find where the rest of the X-Men washed up after coming out the other side of the Siege Perilous. And speaking of which, that will be the next issue, though we don't really have that sense here. Next Dream a Little Dream, where we find out what happened to Colossus. So this is a really excellent conclusion. Plenty of action here. Great drawings from Jim Lee, partnered with Scott Williams. As I said, they're only about just over half a dozen issues into what would turn out to be a career-long collaboration, and some really excellent work by both. Really, Jim Lee putting everything into this three-part storyline, 256, 257, and 258, and it would ultimately win him the gig as regular new penciler on the X-Men when Mark Silvestri would leave in a few issues' time. Great stuff, 23 pages in this particular issue, and so no space for any letters pages at the end of it. Well, there you go. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 258. Let me know your thoughts on this issue in the comment section to the video. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.